Hello, everyone. We are back, and we are back for season 2 of our podcast. And we are back with one of my favorite people in the entire world, Emilia Papadopoulos. So I will let Emilia have a say, and I will let you say something about yourself, but I know how humble you are. So I'm actually going to say some things about you, and then you can go and be your humble self and talk about yourself. So you are a journalist. You've been many places, not just Cyprus. You work for the BBC. You've covered amazing stories. You've covered beautiful stories such as the royal wedding, and you've also done things not so positive, but you have done a lot. And that is why I wanted to do a podcast with you, because I know I really respect what you have to say. I know you have a lot of knowledge. As much as you try and downplay yourself, I know that you know a lot. And I respect, as I know most of the world does, respect a lot what you have to say. So that is why I'm so excited to have you on here today, as well as you being a beautiful person that I know personally. You're a beautiful person. You're not just successful in your career. You are also a beautiful person. You're involved in charity work, which you keep very quiet. You keep very quiet about how amazing you are. So that's why I wanted to interrupt you first and say, actually, this is the Emilia, before you go on and pretend that you're not so special. So,
That's very
welcome.
My husband would probably disagree with all of that and say that I am the least humble person in the world, because all I do is tell people about what I used to do and all my charity work and try and squeeze them for money for my charities. So he would definitely disagree with you, but I'm very flattered. Thank you. That's a beautiful introduction. And I'm so happy. I'm so happy to have this chat with you today, because as you said, we do know each other kind of not just personally, but in a way professionally as well. I know you in your profession. And you, I mean, I could sit here all day talking about all the wonderful things that you do too. So I'm really grateful that you've asked me to be on today. I hope that I will add value in the surprise topics that we're going to discuss.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just super excited. So thank you so much for having me on.
Of course. Thank you for being here. So today we are going to be talking about the topic of talking to children in uncertain times. Now, obviously, with this sentence, I know where everyone's mind is going, but because the world is in such an uncertain period right now. But it's not, for me, this topic isn't just about wars or conflicts. It is about every time you don't have an answer for a child, whether it be pandemics. We all went through the pandemic. Some of us went through the pandemic with children, and some didn't. Natural disasters, political situations, economic crisis, personal situations that, if you're on the verge of a divorce, for example, and you have no idea. If somebody's sick and you don't know whether they're going to make it, what are you going to tell your children? It might be social movements, social media, technology change. So any time basically that we don't have an answer for our children, and how we approach this. And one of the reasons I wanted you specifically for this topic was because I know that as a journalist, you know everything that's happening in the world. You, like it or not, you know everything that's happening in the world, both good and bad. And so for me, for example, I can personally, as a mom, I can just cut off from the world and say, look, I don't want to know. So I can live in blissful ignorance, which means that I can carry on this life of blissful ignorance, and I don't know I don't tell anything to my children because I don't know anything myself. But you, as a journalist, knowing all of these things and knowing, what do I tell my children? How do I tell my children? And how you deal with it while having all of this knowledge.
I think, I mean, you said so many valid things there. Uncertain times, it's a whole range of things. And actually, our world is almost always uncertain in some way, whether it's in your family or wider things going on, or if you live in a place like we do, like Cyprus, which is sort of surrounded by conflict. And we don't know from one day to the next whether or not that conflict might have overspill to where we live. And that's something that we are frightened of course. But I think, you know, one thing I will say is that as a journalist, you have one way of approaching things. You kind of have to know everything. You always want to be in the know. As a mother, it's quite the opposite. I have changed the way I consume the news so much since becoming a mother, to the point where I don't watch the news in the way I used to. I had to before. It was part of my job. I was in a newsroom. I say 24/7, that's an exaggeration, but you know, I spent a large part of my day in a newsroom, kind of across everything that was happening politically within the UK, outside of the UK, world affairs. And that's something that is really, really hard to do when you're a mother, because all of a sudden things have a very different meaning and the repercussions are really, really different. And that's a big change for me, is that I do not watch the news anymore. I read the news. Every time there's a breaking story, I will have a look at it, and I try not to overthink, because as much as I was daring and adventurous in my previous life, we call it BC, before children, I don't have that kind of strength anymore, or the sense of adventure or the bravery, if you like, to handle those stories in the way I used to. When you're only responsible for your own well-being, it's very much one thing. The things I would have done 4 years ago are very different to the things I would do now, because I'm always thinking about the children. So then you have to find new coping mechanisms, and I am exactly like you in that sense. And it's just such a tricky area. And I've done a lot of work actually with my therapist, who I work with a lot, on how to handle certain things, because this is the thing. I think as parents, we don't always have the answer. I remember being in the back of my mum's car when I was about 6 or 7, and I vividly remember this. And I asked her, I said, do you know everything, like everything in the world? Do you know all the answers? And she said, no, I don't have all the answers, but I have a lot of them. And I'll never forget that, because I always was under this impression as a child that once you become a grown-up, you kind of have the answer to everything. And I think part of this whole journey, especially in uncertain times of which we are living, is that it's okay not to have the answer to everything. My daughter asked me the other day, it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and she asked me why we could see the moon in the sky. And I mean, scientifically, I have no idea why I could see the moon at 4 in the afternoon in a light blue sky. I now since know that, but it was that moment of feeling kind of not knowing what to say. It seemed like quite a basic question. And I think in that moment, just being able to say, you know what, I actually don't know the answer. I don't have the answer, but why don't we figure it out together? Let's find out. I'll come back to you on that. And I think with a lot of during uncertain times, there is always an age appropriate way to discuss things, depending on the circumstance. But I think as parents, that the number one thing is to just not be afraid to say that we don't know the answer. And if we have to ask 1, 2, 3, 4 people on how we answer or tackle a specific topic, then that's also okay. That is part of the process of making sure that our child is receiving age-appropriate information, or information that won't cause them any stress or anxiety, because it's very easy. Children pick up on they pick up on things that we don't even know that they're picking up. Conversations that we're having, the lyrics to songs we're listening to in the car that might be on the radio, where you think that's okay, they don't really hear that word. And they do, they hear it, they pick it up. And I always say, it's my job to teach my child context. I want to be the person that teaches my child the context, whether that be the context of bad words or the context of gender issues or whatever it is, big issues in the world. I feel that that is my job to teach them the context, because every family approaches those things differently. But I never want, there's that thing in the playground, we heard it from so and so. I never want them to hear the big things from so and so. I want them to hear them from me, and they can then decide how they process that information and what they do with it.
You mentioned coping mechanisms, and you mentioned that, your coping mechanism is similar to my coping mechanism in that I don't want to know. I prefer not to know. I want to live in ignorant bliss. Now, it would take a psychologist to tell us why we have that coping mechanism. But my question has always been to myself, because my coping mechanism is that because I can't handle that anxiety. I don't want it, it causes anxiety for me. So I prefer not to know. And my question always to myself is, do I want to teach my child to have that coping mechanism? Because what I do instinctively is, for example, my own son, he came because he is 11. So he has access to YouTube or whatever. He has his own iPad, and for some reason, he gets notifications to his iPad about news, and he got this notification about travel advice to Cyprus, and he came and he asked me. And my instinct is to say, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It's nothing. Everything's fine. And kind of push him towards this ignorant bliss. And I think, is that, as a parent, and I still don't know the answer, so it's a rhetorical question, but is that what I want? Or do I want to teach my children to have the inner strength to say, yeah, I know what's happening, but I can handle it, and I'll handle it when the time comes. Because I have also, growing up, I remember these conversations with my parents as a child. I would say to my dad, I've seen this, and is this going to happen? Or my parents, when we were growing up, were on the verge of divorce, and it was, what's going to happen? Do we have to live apart? And it caused this anxiety. And my dad would always say to me, when it comes to it, we will deal with it.
Yes.
But we will deal with it when it comes to it. So it was a case of don't stop thinking about the future. Don't wind yourself up. We'll deal with it when the time comes. Now, in all of his efforts, this didn't really stick to me. And I became this person that I just wanted to be ignorant. I wanted to live in this ignorant bliss of, I don't know anything. I don't know what's happening, and, kind of live in this beautiful little world. And do we want that for our children? I don't know.
Look, I think you're talking about two different things here, because perhaps as a child, if you're looking at uncertain times within a family, so the breakdown of a marriage, parents separating, parents fighting, it's something that, at the moment, the statistics are that, almost 50%, if not more, families are going through that kind of thing. We are looking at something that's a little bit different to a child looking at travel advice, and because it's much closer to home. It's much closer to home. And when you're a young child, and perhaps in your case, it came from a place of protecting yourself, not wanting to know, because actually what you already knew, which was your family all together under one roof, like the matchbox drawn, everybody there, everything as normal, was a safe space. That was what you knew. It was the only thing you knew. And actually thinking about anything other than that picture felt uneasy, right? We all feel a little bit uneasy. I mean, I'm somebody that doesn't like change. I don't do very well with change. And sometimes I prefer to have everything the way I like it, whether that's, even like the way the spices are in the kitchen or the things are in the fridge. And as children like that, right? Children love routine. You have a lot more experience with children than I do, but what I have noticed is that my children, they love routine. They love knowing when the bath is, when the bed is, when the meal is, this is this day, that's that day. And I think when you're looking at dynamics within a family, when times are uncertain, children will often follow their instincts and try and protect themselves. And I understand your dad's way of dealing with it, because I think ultimately with all situations of uncertainty, our priority is to protect our children. I always say to my children, we were walking down a street the other night, now that the time has changed and it was a little bit darker than normal. It was still 5 p.m., but it was dark. And my daughter said to me, I'm scared, it's dark. And I said, when you're with mummy, you're never scared. And even though I would be scared walking down that little street on my own at night, there's something, you know, they always talk about that story of the mother that lifted the car to save her baby that was under a car. This kind of strength that you get when you're protecting, like lions, or I guess like, you know, those mammals in the wild, you have instinct to protect your young. And in that moment, there was absolutely nothing, no matter what came around the corner in the dark, on the dark road or the dark alley, let's just call it for dramatic effect, there was nothing that would have harmed my children. I was on full alert. And that's our instinct as parents, is to protect them as much as we can. The question is, do we pretend that nothing is going on? Or do we sit and say that we're also a little bit concerned, but it will be okay? I don't know. Or do we tell them the whole truth and nothing but the truth, if they're old enough to hear it? Again, a difficult one. It's really, really tricky, and I feel for you, because your children are of an age now where they're kind of more attuned. They know how to log into YouTube. They can read. They can write. My instinct at the moment with mine, who are 4 and 2, is, I can protect them from all of this for at least another 2 years. They can't read. They can't write. They don't really understand how to use YouTube. They don't have social media. It's a lot easier to control it. But they have other uncertainties. But I think in your case, it's so tricky. And I think telling them, I think it's different if you're living in a war zone. You know, we're seeing now so many pictures from conflicts around the world. At the moment, there are so many active, we only hear about 2, but there are a lot of active conflicts. And there are a lot of children. Actually, children are one of the groups, the largest affected groups of those living in conflict. And I kind of think, I always wonder how those parents go about talking to their children. I also think living in Cyprus, we do have children who are of nationalities, you know, who have relatives or family, whether it be in Israel or Lebanon or Palestine or Ukraine or Russia. I mean, we are in Cyprus a hub, right? We have so many different nationalities. We all get along here. It's a lovely place to live. And everybody here gets along. But I think it's very, very different if you're a parent whose roots are from any of those countries at the moment that have active conflicts. You're going to be talking to your kids very differently to the way you and I are. You know, we are not actively involved in those. And those are really tricky conversations to have. But I think people handle it differently. I think with small children, there is absolutely no need. There is no need. You protect them as long as you can. When they get to 10, 11, they're getting notifications on YouTube and they're seeing more things themselves and able to ask those difficult questions. It kind of has to be, I think, a little bit of a balance between that blanket of protection, but also a little bit of honesty as well. Because they'll hear it somewhere else. That's what we were saying before. You know, you want to be the person that teaches your children context.
I think that the idea of blanket of protection, I think it's something that every person should have, whether they are 2 or 20 or 40. I think it helps us remain healthy. And what I mean is that not that they're going to be ignorant. So my 11-year-old can come to me and ask what's going to happen. Or what's happening. Now I can tell them ABC is happening, but I promise you we're going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Now, do I know it's going to be okay? No, I don't know it's going to be okay. But with the same way that I am in my 30s and I have a dad who's in his 60s. And last year, last year, what month? No, this year in May, I went through a very terrifying period where, I went for a breast examination, they found something and I had to wait 2 weeks to find out what it was.
Oh, the
And
worst.
And I am in my mid-30s and I was still going to my dad in his 60s and saying, is it going to be okay? Did he know it was going to be okay? He did not know it was going to be okay. But what my dad was saying to me, what he was giving me that blanket of protection, which was, I don't know what it is, but what I can promise you is that whatever it is, we will get through it and we will get through it together and everything is going to be fine. And what my dad would always say to me was, in the end, everything is going to be okay. And if it's not okay, it's not the end. So he would give me that blanket of protection while saying to me, I don't know. I don't know if this is going to turn out okay. I don't know if this is going to turn out to be cancerous. I'm saying to my children, I don't know if what's going to happen in the world, but what I can promise you is that we are going to be okay. And so I think it is important for us to give them an answer. It might not be the answer, but an answer of, I'm here. Like you said to her, if I'm here, nothing's going to happen to you. Now, do you know nothing's going to happen to her? No, you don't, but it's important.
And this is exactly the thing, is that you have to say something. And I think when you're dealing with any kind of uncharted territory, we don't always know the answer. We don't, you might say the wrong thing. You might not know what to say. You might say nothing. But I always think saying something, if you don't know the answer, just say you don't know. You're going to come back to it together. Make it, depending on the age of the child, you can make it something that you either look into together or you can come back to it. There is nothing wrong with that. But I think when you're dealing as an adult with emotional stress, it is very, very difficult. And what you don't want to do, or anyway, what I think, I don't know the answers, by the way. I'm not a therapist. I'm not into all this stuff. But I always think I'm a very anxious person. I am somebody that, feels emotional stress on a very deep level. And I try very hard not to project that onto my children, because I make them nervous about the world. Because as much as there is so much going on at the moment, but the world is also a wonderful place. It's a wild place. It's a beautiful place. There is so much good and beauty in the world. And I think as you get older, you kind of focus more on the bad. You're kind of more aware of bad people or bad things or bad, health scares and finances. There is so much more stress the older you get. And I do feel that there are certain things that it's okay to protect children from, to a certain point, because that's kind of our job, right? I think what children require is to feel safety and to feel that they are protected. And we can't do that forever. But there is a period of time that we can do that. And it might not be the way everyone does it, but, I see my job as protecting my children for as long as I possibly can, and not in a kind of a ridiculous way where I follow them around with 10 people and don't let them do anything and wrap them up in cotton wool when they want to go on a bicycle. Not like that. More of a kind of protect them emotionally. And what I definitely don't want to do is project my stress and anxiety, because I have that. It's different when you don't have kids. I was doing a job where I was on the daily sometimes in London, seeing, murders or a terrorist attack or things that, a railway crash, a bus crash, things that I became very, very used to. Those became a way of life. Those became routine. Nothing shocked me. But now it's very different. The stakes are higher. And the way it would affect my mental health now is very, very different, because I always look at world events or things like that in the context of my children. Oh, what? And I become very fatalistic about it sometimes. I say, oh, what world have I brought them into? And it's also very good, I think, for all of us to pause and reflect and just remember that there is also good in the world. And that's how I kind of gauge my balance of the information that I give. And as I said, mine are quite young. I don't have to explain it. Yours are of the age where you kind of do have to start saying something. And it's okay not to know the answers, but we do have to say something.
But even at children your age, that your children are, there are uncertain times. Now, doing what I do, an uncertain time, look, an uncertain time for my 12-year-old is him reading the news and hearing that there's a war. But an uncertain time for a 3-year-old is going to preschool for the first time. They don't know. And what I've learned, if anything, in what I do is that a child will always look at their parent to see, what is mummy doing? How is mummy reacting? What does mummy's face say? What does mummy's energy say? And they will react accordingly. So it's, I think, and I think this exists even as you grow into adulthood. Like I said before, I think you always look for that person to lean on. So as a parent, I think one of the most important things we can do is to stay calm, be honest, but stay positive. And which is, again, it comes back to my question of talking about somebody to lean on.
Yeah.
Do we want to teach them to always lean on someone, as lovely as it is, and as much as I think that each person should have that in their life because it helps keep it, it helps keep us healthy. But should we do that, or should we be teaching them to be self-sufficient, self-soothe, let's say?
No. And I'll
No.
Look, not everyone is lucky enough to have, a lot of people don't have a close family or a parent that they can lean on, or, their parents are not around. But I think there's always somebody. And I have always been a big believer in a problem shared is a problem halved. Now, there are times where kids need to toughen up, or I need to toughen up, definitely. But I think I would really love to teach my kids that there's absolutely nothing wrong in asking for help, whether that's, emotional help, or just to open up and talk about something that might be bothering you or giving you anxiety. I think now the world has changed so much where people are not ashamed to say, I'm in therapy, or I see a therapist. I see a therapist. It's the best thing I've ever done in my life. And I honestly dread to think what I was like before it, because I harbored so much anxiety and so much worry, and nobody ever really made me feel that way. But I always kind of felt like I didn't want to put it on my friends or my boyfriend or my mum or my dad. I didn't want them to have to deal with this heavy load of things that I was feeling and thinking. And I didn't think that was normal. And now it's normal. Everybody deals with things in different ways. But I think knowing that you can go to somebody, everybody has their somebody, whether that's your husband or your friend or your priest or your rabbi or everybody has somebody. You have somebody that you can open up to. And I always think when you say something out loud, this is one thing. I keep talking about the therapist, but I love her. But she taught me something very valuable very early on, which was that when you say a scary thought out loud or you share it, automatically you reduce its importance and you reduce its value by 50%. So it's not as scary anymore when you say it out loud. And it's something that I started doing because I would think something and I thought, if I say it out loud, it becomes real. It becomes a real problem that I've now said in the universe. It's out there. And actually it had the opposite effect. So I think sometimes the things that scare us the most are the things that we need to face head on and walk through it and say it out loud and just deal with it. In therapy, they call it walking through the fire, which is where you kind of put all your worst fears out on the table. You lay them all out, the worst case scenarios of any situation. Sometimes they're crazy scenarios in my head that I've come up with. What if, the ceiling falls and we're here, really things that probably the probability of them happening are very, very small. But I think anxious people often do that. They often do come up with scenarios and they are very believable. And, we kind of worry about things that haven't happened yet. So phase one is kind of learning to stop worrying about things that have not yet happened. And phase two is then, either if they happen or they might be close to happening, is facing them head on, not being afraid of the thought. If you don't have anyone to talk about it with, say it out loud. It becomes a lot less scary. And again, not everyone loves talking about their problems. I understand that as well. Some people prefer to deal with things in private, but I do really believe that, a problem shared is a problem halved. And if you have a good ear, if you have anyone around you with a good ear that can listen, somebody that you trust, somebody that can open their heart and just listen with an open heart and an open mind, things are just a lot less scary.
So maybe this is something we should be teaching our children. Maybe this is something when our children come to us with a fear, our question should be, what are you afraid of?
Yeah.
What are you afraid of happening? So if they come to us and say, you and daddy are arguing a lot, our question should be, what are you afraid of happening? And maybe based on what you've just said about walking through the fear, is that what you said it is called?
Yeah.
Maybe it's a good idea, which I've never thought of, to be honest. It's a good idea for us to be teaching our children to walk through the fear and say, what are you afraid of? Let's talk about it. And maybe, as you said, once they've said it out loud, you can say, so you're worried that a war is going to start in Cyprus. And then this kind of, when they've said it out loud, they might realize, but that's, it's very unlikely. So I think that's I've never thought about it as a parent. I've never done it as a parent. As I said, I kind of, as I say to my child, I always say, no, everything's gonna be fine. Don't worry about it. No, it's gonna be fine. And I kind of push them into this world of butterflies and rainbows, as opposed to saying, what are you afraid of? Let's talk about it. The most important thing is teaching our children to talk about their fears and to listen. My son, so he gets quite anxious. He's 12, but he gets quite anxious. And I always say to him, because his anxiety usually comes at night when he's about to go to sleep. I don't know.
Oh, doesn't it always? I
relate. Yes. And I always say to him, which again is something that I learned as a child, I always say to him, everything looks better in the morning.
Yeah.
So he gets some rest and he wakes up in the morning. And what I'm trying to teach him through this is sometimes we wind ourselves up so much, we convince ourselves of something so negative that sometimes we just need to take a minute to breathe and not think about it and come back. And sometimes it looks better than it actually is.
Yeah, but and this is another thing, we didn't even discuss the pandemic, because that was a time where our kids, well, your kids were kind of living that through, that they were doing that day by day with you. They were finding out at the same time you were, and it was completely uncharted territory. None of us knew what was happening. It was almost like one of those really weird kind of sci-fi films that I always avoid on Netflix. It was like that. I was pregnant at the time, and I couldn't imagine what it would have been like having young children during that time who were asking questions. And I was so grateful I did not, because I didn't know the answers. No one did. But again, it was, we got through that.
Again, it was just a case of saying, I don't know what is going to happen, but I can promise you that I will make sure you're okay. And that was simply because mine were at that time, they were 7 and 6. Yeah. So they were on that cusp of understanding, but not understanding. And I think it all boils down to them feeling, we don't know what's going to happen, but as long as I'm with mummy and as long as I'm with daddy, I'm going to be okay. And I think all of us, I think if we're able to, we should be giving our children that. My dad still gives me that.
Oh, mine too.
And it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing to have. And we should be giving our children that without lying to them. So,
if you can, if you're someone that is able to, and I say that, you know, bearing in mind the people that will have relatives in war zones or relatives that suffered from COVID or lost relatives in COVID, not everybody can, because people have had experiences and life experience that makes them unable to always have a lovely view of the world. And I think we're really, really fortunate to be in a position where at the moment we can do that. And it can't do any harm, right? I think, you know, even you see mothers that have been through the worst of the very worst, whether that's in natural disasters or war zones or the pandemic, who still come out and their one priority is protecting their children, you know?
mm-hmm.
And you see children that have come out of those situations. I'll never forget interviewing, when I worked at the BBC on Holocaust Memorial Day, I had the privilege of interviewing a Holocaust survivor called Hannah Lewis. And she was one of the most incredible people I've ever met. She was a child at the time where her family was taken away to concentration camps. She too, and she was a very talented musician. So in the course of her life, she basically saw her whole family perish. As a child, she was a child at the time, a young child. And when Auschwitz was liberated, or when I think it was Auschwitz, she was when it was liberated, she was then sent to the United Kingdom. She met her husband, started a new life. And she's one of the most positive people I have ever met. And I think I asked her so many times, but you kind of went through so much atrocity, you went through so much pain, so much hardship. You know, how are you so positive? And she said it was the only thing that she had to cling on to during that time. She was also young enough. I mean, I think she was quite young at the time, but I can't imagine being in a situation like hers. And she was so positive about the world at the time I interviewed her, which would have been about 6 or 7 years ago now. She was so positive that the world has learned lessons, or it must learn lessons. Things must never happen again. But she chose to live her life with positivity, and she chose to always have a bright outlook. And I left that day feeling, you know, sometimes you meet people who change the way you think. They change the trajectory of your thoughts and the way you approach life. She was one of them, because I just felt that's the most I've ever learned from somebody. And I didn't meet her for long. It was probably about 10 minutes. And it was a real privilege actually to talk to somebody that had faced so much hardship as a child and in that young adult life and come through it. And she was one of the most incredible people, and she still is. She's amazing. But just to say that there's good is always stronger than evil. And maybe that's not everyone's view, but that's how I choose to look at things, and that's how I choose to go to bed and wake up every day. Otherwise I'd go mad.
That's a defense mechanism.
Absolutely.
That's a very strong defense mechanism, and I think that's a beautiful defense mechanism to teach our children. To look, there's always something to be grateful for, even if we are talking about that parent in the middle of something so negative. You can find the gratitude somewhere, or try, because it will, if we teach our children to do that, then it will help them protect themselves.
Absolutely.
I got a lot out of that conversation, actually, Emilia.
Did you?
And I hope everyone else did.
I don't know. There was a lot of I don't know the answer to this.
No, but that's a reality. We're parents, and that's the reality, and everyone deals with it differently. But I think we got a lot out of it. The fact that we should be teaching our children to speak. We should be teaching them to acknowledge their emotions. We should be teaching them to sometimes take a break, and that it's okay to take a break, and they just have to, as Nico said, go to sleep for a little bit, and everything will look better in the morning. I think I hope that we have answered some questions or given some advice to those parents struggling.
You'll never have me back. You'll never have me back.
I will.
We did
I will.
We had a nice chat. Look, I think, yeah, that's the top line is that we don't know the answers, and it's okay if you don't either. That's what the episode should be called.
Yes.
We don't have the answers, and it's okay if you don't either. There you go.
Nobody has the answers. Nobody has the answers.
No,
We're
we don't.
all winging it as we go along, and with experience we get answers, or with experience we know how to handle things. But yeah, as long as you love your children and stand next to them, that's all they need at the end of the day. But thank you so much again. I really enjoyed our chat. We should have had a coffee as well. We should have had a coffee with us.
Well, I think it's dark now. We should have had a glass of wine. But we'll do the next one in person with a coffee or a glass of wine.
Yes, will. We will sort that out. We will do that. We'll sort
maybe
that out.
a lighter topic next time, so we can actually, have I can bring out my true character.
Yes, with the wine. That'll be an interesting.
No, just maybe like slightly lighter. Because I'm very funny. I'm a really funny person.
You are funny.
I'm funny.
You are.
Like there wasn't much room for jokes today because sometimes be serious. But it's been so lovely chatting to you, and I think you are wonderful, and you are one of those. I said it to you before we came on. You are one of those people. I don't know if you know this or not, but when I would see you daily, I felt like everything was going to be okay.
Aww.
And that's because at the time my children were in your care. But that's a very powerful position to hold, for somebody to walk away and think she's there, everything will be okay. I don't have that with many people, but you always give off this air of being fully in control. And I know things are different at work and when it comes to your own children in your own home, but you do an amazing job. You're very, very brave. I know you've been through a lot in your years, and I think you give great advice, and you know how to tackle things, and just trust yourself, trust your instincts, and don't put your head in the sand with anything. Don't try and cover it up. Just say, you don't know when you don't know, and in other times, walk through the fear.
Yeah, that's what the episode is going to be called, walking through the fear.
Yep.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much. Thank you for those words. That really means a lot. But I thank you. That's all I can say.
I know you just want to keep talking to me.
I don't want you to go. I've missed you. So you'll be back though. You will be back.
Well, and yeah, they might, if we get, well, maybe I'll be back, or people might say we hated that one. It was terrible.
No, you'll be back.
I would love to be back, and I would love to see you. And I thank you. You are wonderful. And keep up.
You too, my love. Well, have a lovely night, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.